Detective Miller had worked plenty of late nights, but there was something about the hum and glare of the precinct's interview room after midnight that always scraped his nerves raw. He sat alone at the metal table, fingertips drumming a pattern on the case file in front of him, waiting for the officers to bring in their suspect. Tonight, it was Daniel Ross, mid-30s, clean-cut, pale as a winter morning. The man had been found wandering near the third crime scene, hands in his pockets, eyes flat and distant, calm as a man waiting for a bus. His name was barely a rumor in the system, but the pattern of violence matched no one but him. It was enough for probable cause, enough to make Miller wary, enough to keep half the precinct up and watching from behind the two-way mirror. Miller's own reflection looked back at him, drawn, unshaven, the fluorescent light deepening the hollows under his eyes. He checked his notes. 3 victims, all found within 3 miles of each other, no obvious motive. Daniel fit the bill, right age, right build, always in the periphery of security footage, never quite center frame. The evidence was thin, but the sense of something wrong was thick in the air, and Miller trusted his gut. He set his jaw, pressed the button to start the digital recorder, and tried to blink the tiredness from his eyes. The door creaked open, and Daniel entered, cuffed but composed, led by a rookie cop whose posture was stiff with nerves. Daniel sat, folding his hands on the table, and met Miller's gaze without a flicker of emotion. The cop left, closing the door softly. For a moment, the room was still except for the quiet hum of the overhead light. Miller cleared his throat and introduced himself, careful to keep his voice calm, professional. Daniel didn't flinch. "You think I did it?" he asked, voice light and almost amused. "You're not sure though." He sounded more like a therapist than a suspect, and his words sent a ripple of discomfort through Miller's chest. Miller began with routine questions, where Daniel had been, what he'd seen, whether he knew the victims. Daniel answered easily, but his eyes wandered, never quite focusing, as if watching a fly crawl along the wall. Miller felt sweat bead at his temples. The whole thing had an off-kilter rhythm. Daniel kept smiling, a small, too smooth curve of the lips. Miller tried to steer the conversation, but Daniel always seemed a step ahead, dodging, redirecting, leaving Miller chasing after his own questions. Behind the two-way mirror, shadows gathered. Diaz, the rookie, biting his nails. Captain O'Malley, arms crossed and silent. 2 techs, whispering to each other. Miller could feel them watching, could feel the heat of expectation, the silent demand for answers. He forced himself to look up at the glass, to reassure himself that his audience was real, his footing secure. That's when he saw it. In the mirrored surface, Miller could see himself, tired, hunched, working through another night. He saw the table, the scattered files, the shape of the interview room. But where Daniel sat, there was nothing, not a shadow, not a blur, not even the vague distortion that comes from cheap glass. The chair looked empty, though Daniel was right there in front of him, pale hands folded, breath fogging in the cold air. Miller blinked hard, convinced he was seeing things. He turned, confirmed Daniel was still there, then looked back, still nothing in the mirror. A cold ache settled at the base of Miller's spine. He tried to hide his reaction, shifting in his seat and leaning forward, voice steady. "You know, Daniel, it's late, my mind's playing tricks, but something about you doesn't fit." He flicked his eyes to the glass, willing his colleagues to see what he saw. Diaz leaned closer, O'Malley's frown deepened, and one of the techs made a startled gesture. Daniel's lips curled in that half-smile again. "Mirrors are funny things, detective. Sometimes they show you what you want, sometimes what you fear." His gaze slid to the glass, as if he could see through to the observation room. "I've always preferred rooms without them." Miller's hands tightened on the file. He asked another question, but it came out flat, uncertain. Daniel's answers became stranger, slipping off topic, his eyes gleaming in the fluorescent haze. The room seemed colder, the light flickering overhead. Miller felt his pulse race, adrenaline spiking in his veins. He glanced again at the mirror. Still nothing. The chair opposite him was as empty as a grave. Behind the glass, O'Malley whispered, "What the hell?" and Diaz's face had gone bloodless. Miller closed the file and leaned back, eyes locked on Daniel's unreadable expression. He felt as if the room had become a trap, not for Daniel, but for himself and everyone watching. As the interview wound on, Miller found himself sweating, heart pounding, unable to look away from the empty chair in the mirror. Daniel watched him, smiling quietly, as if they shared a secret no one else would ever understand. Detective Miller tried to focus on the notepad in front of him, but the lines blurred and slipped away beneath the weight of what he'd just seen. Every instinct screamed at him to call for backup, to end the interview, to get out of that room, and never look back. But he forced himself to remain still, jaw clenched, hands clasped beneath the table. Daniel sat across from him, cool and poised, as if he had all the time in the world. In the reflectionless glass, Miller could just make out Diaz and the captain, their faces pinched with uncertainty. No one was moving, as if a spell had settled over the entire precinct. Miller cleared his throat and kept his tone casual, as if nothing was wrong. "Daniel, you know how these things go. We have to ask about your movements, your contacts, any alibi you want to share." His pen trembled as he wrote, the words tight and slanted. Daniel shrugged, a slow, graceful motion. "I walk, I think. Sometimes I watch the city at night. There's a lot to see after dark." His gaze never wavered. "But you know that, don't you? You look like a man who doesn't sleep much." Miller ignored the jibe, pressing forward with the details of the case: time, place, weapon. Daniel's answers came softly, almost hypnotic, full of pauses and empty spaces. Each response seemed designed to reveal nothing at all, or perhaps too much. Every statement a riddle, a misdirection. He'd answer a question about his job by talking about the moon, about childhood fears, about the way some places echo with memory. Miller felt as if he was interviewing not a suspect, but a ghost. Behind the mirror, Captain O'Malley's voice was a low hiss in Miller's earpiece. "Stay with it, Miller. Don't let him rattle you." "But," he paused, a note of fear creeping in. "We all see it. The chair. Stay sharp." Miller wanted to demand answers right then, to push Daniel against the cold reality of the empty mirror, but something in Daniel's posture, a kind of lazy patience, warned him off. Instead, he shifted tactics, trying to break the suspect's rhythm. "You ever been in a police station before, Daniel? Most people are a little more nervous." Daniel's lips twitched. "I'm not most people." He looked straight at the glass, and for a split second, Miller could almost believe Daniel was seeing everything behind it: the captain, Diaz, the techs. Mirrors are never quite what they seem, are they? You can look into them all night and never really see yourself. A chill swept the room. The overhead light flickered and steadied. Miller found himself staring at his own reflection, at the way the shadows seemed to crowd in around him. His hand went unconsciously to his badge, as if to reassure himself he was still real, still on the side of the living. He decided to press harder. "You know why you're here, Daniel. You're a person of interest in 3 homicides. The last victim was found less than 3 blocks from where you were picked up. You're always nearby, but never in the frame. How do you explain that?" Daniel smiled, a slow unfolding. "Some people are always in the wrong place, at the wrong time. Or maybe the right place, depending on how you look at it. It's all a matter of perspective." His eyes were cold, bottomless. "You can watch me as long as you want, but you'll never see what you want in that mirror." Miller bit back his frustration. "You seem very interested in mirrors, Daniel. Is that a habit of yours?" Daniel's gaze grew distant, voice dropping to a near whisper. "You can trap all sorts of things in glass. Fear, memory, secrets. But some things slip through. Some things were never meant to be seen." A tremor passed through Miller. He leaned back, searching for calm, and decided to end the round of questions. "We'll take a break, get you some water." He pressed the button for the officer outside. As Daniel waited, he steepled his fingers, gaze never leaving Miller's face. "Be careful, detective. Sometimes when you stare too long, something stares back." When Daniel was led from the room, Miller stood and stretched, feeling cold sweat under his arms. Diaz entered from the hall, face pale. "Sir, we checked the glass, the lighting, everything. There's nothing wrong with the setup. It's him. The camera, same thing. You see him in the room, but not in the mirror, not in the feed, just a blur. It's like he isn't really here." Miller pressed his hands to his face, then looked back into the observation room, where the others waited. He felt the weight of their stares, the growing terror, in the air. He knew deep down that this was no trick of the light, no parlor game. The case had turned, and whatever Daniel was, he was not what he appeared to be. Miller left the interview room, heart pounding, and tried not to think about what he'd seen. The empty chair, the cold smile, the voice echoing in the dark. In the corridor, a patch of light flickered on the linoleum. For just a moment, Miller thought he saw his own reflection moving without him, lagging, uncertain, before the hallway snapped back to normal. He shuddered and hurried on, trying to convince himself the sun would rise and that everything would make sense in the morning. Miller splashed cold water on his face in the men's room, gripping the edge of the sink until the numbness faded from his fingertips. The precinct around him buzzed with low, uneasy energy, a place where every cop knew something was wrong, but no one wanted to say it out loud. He avoided the mirror as much as possible, catching only the briefest flash of his reflection in the silvered glass above the taps. In the flicker of fluorescent lights, his face looked older, drawn tight with doubt. He found Diaz leaning against the hallway wall, staring into his phone as if searching for a lifeline. The rookie looked up as Miller approached. "Sir, I pulled the video feed from the interview," Diaz said quietly, his voice pitched low so it wouldn't carry. "You have to see this." They ducked into a side office and locked the door behind them. Diaz set his phone on the desk and hit play. The footage from the interrogation room played out in grainy black and white. There was Miller, tense and wary, facing Daniel across the battered metal table. Daniel's outline was visible, his features blurred, like someone caught mid-motion or underwater. But in the reflection on the two-way mirror, where Daniel should have been, there was nothing at all. The chair looked empty, as if Miller had spent an hour questioning the air. Miller's hands curled into fists. "Play it back," Diaz obliged, fast-forwarding to the moment. Daniel's smile widened, and he glanced at the glass. The feed glitched, static lancing the screen, the image warping, and then righting itself. Where Daniel's reflection should have appeared, there was only a crawling darkness, like the shadow of a cloud that never moved. Diaz's voice was barely above a whisper. "It's like he's not even there." Miller nodded, the truth settling like ice in his veins. "Whatever he is, I think he wants us to know. He's not hiding." Diaz swallowed hard. "What do we do?" "We go back in." Miller's voice was steadier than he felt, "and this time, we don't let him control the conversation." They returned to the interview room together. Daniel was already seated, hands folded, waiting with the patient stillness of a spider in its web. The air was colder than before, and Miller thought he saw his own breath cloud for an instant before vanishing in the flicker of light. He sat down, Diaz standing behind him, notepad clutched in white knuckles. "Let's be clear, Daniel. The mirror. You know what I'm talking about." Miller didn't bother with small talk. "Why can't we see you in it?" Daniel's smile grew, the corners of his mouth lifting in a way that made Miller's skin crawl. "You're seeing more than most, detective. Mirrors are honest. They tell you what's really there, or what isn't." His voice seemed to echo, a faint doubling, as if someone else whispered the same words an instant after. Miller pressed on. "Who are you?" Daniel looked directly at Diaz, then at Miller. His eyes were suddenly ancient, full of something hungry and deep. I'm whatever you need me to be. I'm the reason your hands shake at night, detective. I'm the face you avoid in your own mirror. The overhead lights flickered. Somewhere in the building, a radio let out a burst of static. The room was freezing now. Miller tried to ignore the chill, focusing on Daniel's words. You were at the crime scenes. What did you do to those people? Daniel tilted his head, smile never fading. People see what they want. Some people want to see monsters. Some people just want the truth to go away. I don't choose. I only show up when the time is right. Diaz's voice cracked. Why can't you be seen? On video in the glass. What are you? Daniel turned his empty gaze on the rookie. You already know. You felt it every time you walk home alone at night. Every time you check the mirror and hope it's really you staring back. There's really you staring back. Not all things cast shadows. Not all things want to be remembered. Miller felt a surge of anger. Fear's last refuge. You're playing games, but you're here now, and we don't scare easy. For the first time Daniel laughed. A low rasping sound that buzzed in the floor and the bones. You scare just like everyone else. You're all afraid of the dark. You should be. The lights dimmed, the room shrinking around them. Daniel's face seemed to shift, features sliding into something unrecognizable, a blur of other faces and hollow eyes. Miller felt the pressure of 100 invisible stares pressing against the glass, the sense that every secret he'd ever tried to bury was suddenly on display. Daniel leaned forward, voice soft but everywhere. Some things were never meant to be seen, detective. Some things see you first. In the silence that followed, Miller could only listen to his own pulse pounding in his ears, and the faint sound of Diaz whispering a prayer behind him. The mirror remained empty, and Daniel's smile, now impossibly wide, lingered like a stain on the night. The air in the interrogation room grew steadily colder, the fluorescent lights overhead stuttering as if threatened by an approaching storm. Miller's breath came in visible puffs, and a tremor worked its way through his arms. Despite his effort to keep them still, Diaz stood rigid behind him, eyes darting from Daniel's shifting shadowless form to the empty reflection in the two-way mirror. It was as if they'd crossed into a place where ordinary rules of light, of sight, of reason, no longer held sway. Daniel drummed his fingers on the table, the sound echoing oddly in the confined space, like footsteps in a long hallway. You're both still here, he mused, as if surprised. Most people run, or look away, or just forget. Miller steadied himself, pushing through the fear to the anger beneath. You're not leaving this room, he said, voice low and hard. Whatever you are, whatever trick you're playing, this ends tonight. Daniel's mouth twisted, almost pitying. You keep telling yourself that, detective. His voice doubled, the timbre strange, as if 2 or 3 people were speaking at once. Some things end, some things begin, but not everything gets a choice. Suddenly the lights went out, plunging the room into total darkness. The only sound was the hum of the ventilation and the faint static from a radio in the hall. Miller fumbled for his flashlight, fingers numb. When he flicked it on, the beam caught Daniel's face, smiling, eyes gleaming, but there was no shadow behind him, nothing on the wall or the floor. Miller swept the light toward the mirror. In the reflection, his own face shone back at him, terrified and pale, but Daniel's chair was empty, the space around it an abyss of blank glass. Diaz's whisper trembled in the dark. Sir, I want out. I want out. Now. Before Miller could respond, the air grew heavy and thick, pressing down on his chest. The room vibrated with a low, mournful sound, like a distant horn, or a voice chanting from another world. The door handle rattled, and Miller heard frantic voices and fists pounding from the observation side. Then Daniel spoke, but the words weren't quite human. They slid and twisted, Ancient syllables Miller's mind rebelled against, each one leaving a taste of cold iron and old blood. The temperature dropped further. Frost bloomed along the edge of the mirror. The glass between rooms began to fog and streak, as if hands were sliding across from the other side. A single bloody palm print appeared, stark against the frost as Daniel stood and approached the mirror. The lights flickered back on, bathing the room in a sickly greenish glow. Daniel pressed his hand to the glass. You wanted the truth, detective, but some truths are hungry. Some truths eat you alive. His eyes bored into Miller's, and Miller felt a surge of memories that weren't his own. Fragments of other lives, other crimes, all haunted by something empty and unnameable. With a sound like tearing silk, Daniel stepped back from the mirror. For a heartbeat his form blurred, face stretching, body flickering like bad film. Then he was simply gone. The chair toppled backward, hitting the floor with a metallic clang. The bloody handprint remained, a single chilling reminder. As the temperature in the room snapped back to normal, the pounding at the observation door finally broke through, and Captain O'Malley, wild-eyed, rushed in with 2 uniformed officers. Where the hell did he go? O'Malley barked, scanning the empty chair, the stunned detectives. Miller sat unmoving, breathing hard, eyes locked on the bloody print. He was never really here. Miller whispered, not the way we thought. Diaz pressed himself against the wall, knees buckling. Sir, the footage, the cameras, none of it caught anything. He's not on the tape. It's just us, talking to an empty chair. O'Malley stared at the blood on the glass, then at Miller. What did he want? Miller shook his head slowly. To be seen, to be remembered, maybe to warn us, maybe just to show us what's waiting if we look too long. The station was thrown into chaos. Doors were checked, alarms triggered, every hallway searched, but there was no sign of Daniel, no record of his arrival, only a growing sense of something unnatural lurking at the edges of their reality. As Miller staggered out into the main corridor, he caught his reflection in a wall of glass, pale, drawn, and for just a heartbeat, a cold, hungry shadow moving behind him. Gone when he turned, the precinct was no longer just a workplace, but a haunted threshold, and Miller knew with dreadful certainty that something had slipped through the mirror and would never quite leave. The precinct never truly settled after that night. For the first time in his career, Detective Miller found himself watching every mirror, every polished pane of glass, as if expecting something to reach out from the other side. The bloody handprint had faded to a ghostly stain no one could wash away, no matter how hard they scrubbed. The janitorial staff muttered about bad energy in the interview wing, and O'Malley, once so certain and stubborn, barely left his office anymore. Miller kept replaying the events in his mind, the cold, the stuttering lights, Daniel's impossible vanishing act. Every time he looked at the camera footage, he saw himself and Diaz questioning an empty chair. The microphones picked up the officers' voices, and Miller's questions echoing into a void, but Daniel's words never made it to tape. In the files, there was nothing but a gap, an unexplained hour, and a bloodied palm on the glass. Rumors began to swirl through the ranks. Some officers convinced themselves it was all a shared hallucination, the result of exhaustion and stress. Others whispered about the devil, or demons, or government experiments gone wrong. Diaz, who'd once been the precinct's golden rookie, asked for a transfer to traffic, anything to avoid another night shift, another interview room. Miller didn't blame him. Even the bravest cop felt watched in the precinct's hallways now. Sometimes late at night, Miller would catch a glimpse of movement behind him in the corner of his eye. When he turned, there was nothing there, just the cold glint of glass, and his own pale face, haunted and hollow. Unsolved cases began to pile up, more frequent and stranger than before. Witnesses described faceless figures or men, whose eyes swallowed the light. The victims' files were always marked by one detail. In every crime scene photo, the mirrors showed something missing. Sometimes it was just a blur. Sometimes it was the suspect himself present in flesh, but absent in the reflection. One morning, Miller's own bathroom mirror frosted over, and for a moment, he couldn't see himself at all. He started reading about old superstitions, folklore about spirits who couldn't cast a reflection, about entities that could slip through glass from other worlds. In the quiet hours between shifts, Miller's certainty faded, replaced by an uneasy belief in things he'd never wanted to consider. He visited the 3 crime scenes again, and each time he felt colder, watched, as if the darkness itself was following his movements. The department called in outside experts, a parade of tech consultants, psychologists, even a priest. None could explain what had happened, or why it had started with Daniel, or why it wouldn't stop. One by one the consultants left, but the sense of dread remained, thick and sour in the air. Weeks later, Miller sat alone in the old interview room. The lights were harsh, but the air felt thin and cold. He traced the outline of the faded handprint on the mirror, and studied his own face, searching for signs of change. The detective, who had entered that room the night of Daniel's interrogation, was gone, replaced by a man who flinched from shadows, and had learned to dread his own reflection. A tap at the glass startled him. Miller looked up, but there was no one there, only his own wide, fearful eyes. He stood, restless, and stepped out into the corridor, where the city's early morning glow painted silver squares across the tiled floor. The precinct was quiet, the kind of hush that comes before a storm. Diaz's desk was empty. O'Malley's door closed. As Miller passed the break room, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He opened it. There was no message, only a photo, the interview room, the mirror, and an empty chair. He stared at it, a chill crawling up his spine. He checked his reflection in the darkened window. For an instant he saw a figure behind him, tall, pale, smiling with too many teeth. He spun, but the hallway was empty. He wanted to believe it was over, that Daniel was gone, and the balance of things would return. But every mirror now seemed a doorway, every polished floor a threshold. Sometimes he would dream of the interview room, sitting for hours as the chair across from him slowly filled with darkness. In the dreams, Daniel always smiled and said, "Some things see you first." The city's sirens wailed somewhere far away. Miller straightened his jacket, pressed a palm to his badge for reassurance, and walked toward the morning. But he could feel it, the press of invisible eyes in every pane of glass he passed. Some crimes he realized would never be solved, and some questions, like the man with no reflection, would never let him go. He glanced once, and only once, at the black window behind him. This time there was no reflection at all. The night shift at County Dispatch was always slowest when the fog rolled in, blurring the world to headlights and the hum of the emergency radios. Judy had been an operator for 15 years, long enough to know the difference between prank calls, drunks, and true emergencies. It was just past 2 in the morning when Line 3 lit up red, shrill, and insistent, jolting her from the crossword she'd barely touched. 911, what is your emergency? She said, slipping seamlessly into the calm, clipped tone that settled panicked voices on the other end. Static flared, and for a moment, she almost thought no one was there. Then a child's voice, high and terrified. "There's smoke. There's so much smoke, please." A gasp, muffled coughing, and a wild edge of fear in the words. "Mom can't wake up. Please, it's hot. Help us, please." Judy's training took over. "What's your address, sweetheart? Tell me where you are." The child rattled off an address in Maplewood, one Judy knew well, 1427, Oak Lane. She'd sent responders there plenty of times, fender benders, false alarms, a dog bite last summer. But as the child's voice shuddered through the line, Judy felt a cold ripple of recognition. Oak Lane, the house fire, the place that burned down last year, with a family trapped inside. She swallowed. Professional, help is on the way. Stay on the line with me. Can you tell me your name? Evan, the boy sobbed, his voice fading in and out, crackling with the static. Please hurry. I can't breathe. Judy worked quickly, dispatching fire and police, reciting the address in crisp code, her hands moving almost without thought. But her mind spun with images from the news, the burnt timbers, the police tape, the front porch collapsed into cinders, the fire chief, pale and shaken, giving his statement. There were no survivors, cause still under investigation. Yet this boy, this Evan, was here on the line, begging her to save him from a blaze that shouldn't exist. Evan, can you see the door? Judy asked, searching for something solid in the fog of her own memory. Is there a window you can open? Heavy static. A sob. It's too hot. I can't. Mom's not moving. In the background, Judy thought she heard the creak of a door, or maybe a music box chiming a broken melody. She tapped the mute for a heartbeat, calling out to the nearest supervisor. Chief, get a unit to Oak Lane. Now possible child trapped. Active fire. I know the place. Just go. Unmute. Evan, talk to me, sweetheart. Firefighters are on their way. Can you tell me where you are in the house? Upstairs, came the ragged answer, thin as a whisper. There's smoke everywhere. The sound of coughing, wet and desperate. Judy's chest tightened. Memories of her own son, when he was small, hiding in closets during thunderstorms. She pushed it down. All business. Stay low, Evan. Cover your mouth with your shirt. Keep talking to me. The boy made a choking noise. Then the line dropped. A screech of static, and then dead air. Judy's heart hammered. She checked the call log. There it was, incoming from a local number, time-stamped, real as anything. She redialed automatically, but got nothing but a rapid busy signal. The supervisor hovered behind her. You okay, Judy? She nodded, not trusting her voice. The radio crackled as the fire truck checked in, 2 blocks from the address. Copy. Dispatch. On scene in 2. Judy's eyes darted to the call log again, half expecting the number to vanish. It stayed put, stubborn and chilling. She leaned back, trying to piece it together. 1427, Oak Lane. She remembered the names from the news. The Howard family. Mother, father, 1 son, Evan. No survivors, the article said. Bodies recovered. The cause ruled as electrical. The house left a burned-out shell. Property since fenced and posted as condemned. Her skin prickled as the radio blared again. Dispatch. This is Engine 4. We're at 1427, Oak Lane. Be advised. There's no structure here. Just an empty lot. Smells like smoke, but nothing burning. Over. Judy's knuckles whitened on the desk. Copy. Engine 4. Please confirm. No sign of fire. Negative. Dispatch. It's just ashes. The old mailbox. A little fence. Feels off out here. Over. Judy's mind spun. She checked the call history a 3rd time, memorizing the number. She forced herself to be steady as she relayed the update, her voice cool and professional for the rest of the crew. But the chill in her bones was real. She reached for her coffee, then stopped. In the hush of the dispatch center, the phone flashed again. Line 3, same number. A single plaintive ring before going dark. She stared at the silent handset, heart pounding, and for the first time in her career, Judy wondered if someone could call for help from the other side of the ashes. The next hour passed in a surreal, anxious haze. Judy stayed at her station, ears straining for every detail that filtered in from the units on Oak Lane. Engine 4's captain reported again, no visible fire. Dispatch, still getting a whiff of smoke though, almost like someone just put out a campfire. but it's everywhere." His voice was gruff, but Judy could hear the confusion underneath. The officers swept their flashlights over the charred remains, foundation stones, a half-collapsed mailbox, wild grass swallowing blackened timbers. The air carried a faint, acrid tang, enough to sting the nose and water the eyes. Getting some static on the radio, another firefighter said. Could be the power lines, but he broke off, coughing. "It's weird. It's cold as hell, but it feels like the smoke's coming off the ground." Judy's supervisor, Chief Halloran, hovered behind her. "Any luck on a call back?" She shook her head, lips pressed tight. No answer, just a busy signal. She felt exposed, as if the fluorescent lights were too bright, and every word she spoke echoed in the dispatch room. For a moment, she wanted to tell Halloran about the house fire last year, about the Howards, about the obituary with the boy's photo, Evan, age 7, wide brown eyes, and a gap-toothed grin, but she kept it to herself, knowing how it would sound. "Still logged in the system though," she added quietly. "Came from a real number." The fire crew moved in careful formation, their boots crunching on glass and debris. "Dispatch. This is Engine 4. The radio crackled again. One of the guys thought he saw movement upstairs, where the stairs used to be. Maybe an animal. Permission to check it out. Judy's pulse thudded. She glanced at Halloran, who nodded. "Copy. Engine 4. Proceed with caution." "Any sign of the caller?" A pause. "Negative. Dispatch. Not a soul here. But..." The radio hissed, and another voice came on, quieter, almost embarrassed. "Dispatch. This is Officer Perez. I know this sounds crazy, but I swear I just heard a kid yelling help from inside the foundation." Echoed through the stone. "We're sweeping again." The pit of Judy's stomach dropped. She stared at her computer screen, searching for sense. She replayed the call, headphones pressed to her ears. The recording played back the boy's frantic voice. Smoke, heat, his mother, unresponsive. But this time, she noticed something new. In the background, beyond Evan's ragged breaths, there was a faint tinkling sound, like a music box or wind chimes, out of place in the chaos of a burning home. On site, the responders combed the ruins with a desperate, methodical focus. The firefighter, who'd glimpsed movement, pressed deeper into the wreckage, calling out, "Engine 4, to dispatch, checking northeast corner. There's..." He paused, breath hitching. "There's something here. Looks like a child's toy, old, half-melted, stuffed rabbit, still warm to the touch. No footprints though, and no way anyone could have gotten in." Perez chimed in. "I found a cell phone too. Battery's dead, screen cracked, but it's not buried, almost like it was just dropped." The firefighter added, almost under his breath, "Can't shake the feeling we're not alone out here." A hush fell over the channel, even over the radio. Judy could feel it, the prickling, skin-crawling certainty that they were brushing against something unfinished. "Copy, officer. Secure the items, and return to base. We'll log them." Judy clicked through the county's fire records, her hands cold. The Howard family's file filled her screen. Photos, the blackened shell of the house, the yellow tape, rescue workers staring at smoldering beams. The official report, cause undetermined, likely electrical, all occupants deceased. She stared at the screen until the words blurred, trying to match the voice from the 911 call to the picture of the little boy whose world had ended a year ago. At the scene, the units gathered, the toy and the phone sealed in evidence bags. Officer Perez reported, "We're wrapping up. Dispatch. Still smells like smoke out here, though," and he hesitated, voice dropping. "That music sound, like a lullaby. I keep hearing it, but every time I turn around, it stops." Judy leaned back, hands shaking. She looked at the call log again. The number was still there, fixed and solid, but when she clicked to trace it, the system stuttered, spat out an error, then flashed, "No information available. Number not in service." She didn't mention it to Halloran. As the crews signed off, she sat in the near dark of the dispatch center, haunted by the thought of a boy's voice in the static, a toy rabbit still warm, and a call for help that should have been impossible. In the quiet, she wondered how many more lost voices reached out, trapped in the circuits and echoes of a world that had already burned to ash. The dawn crept up gray and slow, settling a pall of exhaustion over the dispatch center, and the responders still lingering at the empty lot on Oak Lane. Judy's relief arrived at 6, but she found herself unable to leave, tethered by a sense of unfinished business and an insistent throb of unease she couldn't shake. The evidence bags, one with the scorched rabbit, one with the shattered phone, sat on the corner of her desk, waiting for property to pick them up. Every time she looked at them, she thought of Evan's voice, thin and desperate, crackling over a line that shouldn't have existed. As sunlight seeped through the dirty window, Officer Perez returned from the site. His uniform was dusted with soot, and he looked more shaken than tired. "Morning, Judy," he said softly. "You get any more calls?" She shook her head, eyes drawn to the call log. "Just the one. Number won't trace. I checked 3 systems." She tried to sound brisk, but her words were hollow. "Did you hear the music box again?" Perez nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. "Faded in and out, like it was coming from underground. Every time I tried to follow, it stopped." He set down his notepad. "There's more. When I found the phone, it was warm, not just from the sun. The battery was still faintly charged. But the thing is, it's the same model and case Evan's parents described after the fire, the one they could never find." Judy swallowed, pulse quickening. "And the toy?" He shrugged, gaze clouded. "That was his too, the rabbit. It's not even dirty, not after a year out in the weather. Doesn't make sense." They stared at the objects in silence, the only sound the faint persistent static from the police scanner. Judy reached out and touched the phone's cracked glass. It was cold now, inert. She glanced at Perez. "You think the call was real?" Perez hesitated. "I don't know what to think. I know I heard a kid. I know you did too. And I know that lot feels wrong, like something stuck there, trying to get out." Judy nodded, lips pressed tight. "I played the recording again. There's a part where you can hear the music box. It matches the melody in the fire report. The family kept it by Evan's bed." A long, uneasy quiet fell. The air seemed colder, despite the rising sun. "Do you ever wonder," Perez murmured, "if sometimes people get caught, like time forgets to let them go?" Judy looked away, swallowing a lump in her throat. "I wonder that a lot, lately." She scrolled through the dispatch database again, pulling up the original incident from a year ago. She compared the time of the fire, then 2:09 a.m., with last night's call. The timestamp matched exactly 1 year to the minute. Her skin prickled. At the station, the fire captain arrived, bearing the latest field report. "No sign of tampering," he said, shaking his head. "No accelerants. Nothing left that could have sparked again. And yet every guy who went out there swears he could smell smoke, feel heat, and hear something. I'm not putting that in my report, but..." He trailed off, glancing at the evidence bags. Judy forced herself to ask, "Did anyone else hear a child's voice?" The captain hesitated, glancing at Perez. "2 of the firefighters say they heard crying. One thought he saw a face in the window. Well, where the window used to be. They're both on mandatory rest now. Pretty shook up." Judy nodded, her gaze dropping to her notepad. "I don't think it's over." Till little after 7, she found herself alone in the break room, evidence bags cradled in her lap. The building was quiet, the morning shift moving with heavy feet. She picked up the rabbit, tracing its singed ear. Something grief, fear, compassion, overwhelmed her. She whispered, "I'm sorry, Evan," not sure if she was talking to the boy, the memory, or herself. When she set the toy down, her phone buzzed. She stared at the screen. A voicemail from an unknown number. With trembling hands, she pressed play. At first, only static, then the music box, and then Evan's voice, softer, now farther away. "Thank you, I just wanted to go home." Judy sat frozen, tears sliding down her cheeks, as the message faded into silence. In that moment, the evidence bags felt lighter, as if some invisible burden had been eased. She didn't know what she believed, not anymore, but as the sun spilled across her desk, and the phone grew still, Judy felt, just for a moment, that maybe a lost voice had finally been heard. Word of the night's events spread quietly through the station, to by midday, even the most skeptical responders were speaking in lowered voices, casting glances at the evidence bags on Judy's desk, and avoiding the subject of Oak Lane altogether. The phone's cracked screen gleamed dully under the fluorescent lights, and the rabbit, its fur singed but startlingly clean, sat at the edge of Judy's workspace, as if waiting for someone to pick it up and carry it home. Judy felt the strain deep in her bones. She finished her shift but lingered, sifting through the details again and again, as if by sheer force of will she could wring out a rational explanation. But reason unraveled in the face of what she'd heard. Evan's plea, the matching timestamp, the music box melody echoing from a ruin. Perez, who'd once scoffed at ghost stories, now looked at his shoes and rubbed the back of his neck when anyone brought up the call. At lunch, Judy found herself sitting alone in the empty dispatch center, replaying the voicemail on her phone. She memorized every syllable, every breath, and bit of static. "Thank you, I just wanted to go home." The words lingered in the air, mingling with the faint scent of coffee and copier toner. She wasn't sure what comfort she could take from them. The case was officially closed, a system glitch, they'd call it, but nothing in her heart felt resolved. By mid-afternoon, she pulled up the audio logs for one last review, headphones clamped tight. She isolated background noises, the crackling of fire, the pattern of Evan's coughing, and clearer now, a rhythmic sound, like footsteps on old floorboards, and the creak of a door that no longer existed. The music box melody played again, faint but certain, and Judy matched it to a lullaby she'd found in the Howard family's case file. She wondered, for the first time, if the boy's spirit had called, not just for rescue, but for remembrance. The burned house, condemned and silent, was the last proof that he and his family had lived, loved, and lost everything in one terrible night. Perhaps the call was a kind of echo, a plea sent out into the world, hoping someone would listen. After her shift, Judy drove out to Oak Lane, parking at the edge of the overgrown lot. The ashes and rubble seemed even smaller under the broad daylight, the weeds grown tall around the stone foundation, and what little remained of the mailbox. A tattered, "No trespassing" sign twisted in the breeze. She sat in her car, clutching the stuffed rabbit, uncertain what had drawn her here. For a long moment, she did nothing but watch the sunlight glint off the broken glass and scorched bricks. Finally, Judy stepped out, her shoes crunching on gravel. She made her way to the spot where the front porch once stood, heart pounding, as if she were trespassing, not just on a property, but on a memory. She set the rabbit on a low stone, beside a tiny cluster of wildflowers that had forced their way up through the ruin. For a moment, the world seemed to hush, a soft stillness that felt like respect. She whispered, "Rest easy, Evan. You're not forgotten." A breeze picked up, rustling the grass, carrying with it the faintest whiff of smoke, and something sweeter, like the powdery smell of a child's blanket. Judy closed her eyes. For just a second, she imagined she could hear the music box again, no longer frantic or lonely, but gentle, as if playing just for her. She felt warmth bloom in her chest, not the heat of a fire, but the simple, unexpected comfort of being heard. Back at the station, Perez logged the evidence. As he placed the phone and the rabbit in storage, he glanced over at Judy. "You think it's over?" he asked softly. Judy considered. I don't know if things like this ever really end, but maybe the worst of it has passed. She looked at him and managed a small tired smile. Maybe he found his way home. Later that night, as the dispatch room emptied and Judy prepared to leave, she glanced at her call log one last time. The entry from Evan's number had disappeared. Where it had been, there was only a blank space, as if the system itself had made room for something to be let go. Judy left the building as dusk fell, the day's last light lingering on the horizon. She thought of the boy's voice, the music, and the quiet at Oak Lane. Maybe the dead couldn't always be saved, but perhaps, if they reached out, they could still be comforted. As she drove home, the air felt lighter, the world quieter, and for the first time since the call, Judy was not afraid of what the night might bring. Night had settled again by the time Judy finally left the station, her car headlights cutting across the sleepy town, tracing familiar streets, transformed by the weight of all that had happened. The roads were empty, as if the whole community was holding its breath, and Judy felt strangely at peace, lighter than she'd felt in years. The phone call, the scorched rabbit, the impossible voice, none of it had an answer she could file away, but the world didn't feel as haunted anymore. She let the windows down, breathing in the scent of summer grass, and followed the quiet route home. She couldn't stop herself from taking a small detour down Oak Lane. The moon hung low, the burned lot, washed in silver and shadow, a patch of wildflowers glowing like tiny lanterns by the old stone foundation. The stuffed rabbit she'd left was still there, untouched, its stitched smile turned up toward the sky. Judy pulled to the curb and sat for a long moment, letting the silence settle over her. In that hush, she thought she heard the faintest strain of music, maybe her memory, maybe something more, drifting on the breeze. The night after the call, word spread quickly in town. Some neighbors had noticed fire trucks at the ruins, and whispered about seeing lights moving in the blackened house. A few teenagers claimed they'd heard a child's laughter from the lot after midnight, and one elderly woman called the station to say she'd seen a boy in pajamas, waving goodbye. Judy logged those reports, grateful for the sense that Oak Lane's story had been shared, not hidden away in the dark. Days turned to weeks. The phone and rabbit were filed as unsolved evidence, items from a call the official record would never fully explain. Sometimes Judy would catch Perez lingering in the evidence room, his expression soft as he glanced at the sealed bags. Other times, she'd find herself listening to old audio files, her finger hovering over Evan's last message. She never erased it, letting the child's voice live on as a reminder. "Thank you, I just wanted to go home." At home, Judy felt echoes of the experience in small comforting ways. She slept better. The dreams she'd had for years of sirens and unanswered phones and voices lost in smoke faded, replaced by a quiet assurance that sometimes the world let the lost ones find their way. She began keeping flowers in her kitchen window, wild and untamed, and started calling her grown son just to hear his voice. Life, so often punctuated by tragedy and unfinished stories, felt softer somehow, as if a hard lesson had gently settled into the rhythm of ordinary days. A month after the call, Judy stopped by the Oak Lane lot one last time. She brought a small bunch of daisies, tucking them next to the rabbit and the stubborn clump of wildflowers. Standing there in the quiet dusk, she felt the pull of grief and gratitude, the ache of all that couldn't be explained, but still mattered. She whispered her thanks, not sure who might be listening, and for a heartbeat the air seemed to shimmer, the smell of smoke replaced by a breath of summer rain. She turned to leave, but as she walked back to her car, she paused and glanced at her phone. No missed calls, no new voicemails, just the gentle silence of a night well lived. She slipped behind the wheel and started the engine, glancing once in the mirror. For just a moment, caught in the silver light, She thought she saw a small figure standing near the flowers, a boy in pajamas, waving, his face lit with peace and recognition. Judy blinked, and the figure was gone, but she carried the warmth of that vision all the way home. In the months that followed, a new family bought the Oak Lane lot and started building a house where the old one had burned. Neighbors sometimes said they heard music at twilight, or saw the shape of a child running through the wild grass, but no one felt afraid. When the new house was finished, the family planted a garden where the wildflowers grew thickest, never knowing the full story, but grateful for the beauty that flourished in the ashes. Judy stayed at Dispatch, trusted and calm, and as the anniversaries slipped by, she sometimes wondered if more lost voices might call for help. Every year, on the night the house had burned, she left a small flower on the edge of the lot and paused for a moment's silence, honoring the boy whose message had crossed the lines between worlds. She never forgot the night Evan's voice reached out, or how her own quiet act of listening had helped a lost spirit find peace. Sometimes, when she walked past the new house and saw the garden blooming, she would smile and listen for a faint grateful thank you riding on the wind. And in those moments, Judy knew she had done exactly what she was meant to do: answer the call, bear witness, and send kindness out into the night, so that even in the ashes, hope could take root and grow. Dawn crept quietly over the small town, tinting the edges of the park with pale gold. It was the kind of morning that made everything seem briefly, impossibly new. Mist clung to the grass and wound through the playground equipment as a lone jogger, Nancy Foley, an elementary school teacher, cut across the winding path, earbuds in, thoughts drifting toward coffee and lesson plans. It was Nancy who found him, just past the stand of birch trees at the creek's edge. She stopped so abruptly that her music ripped out of her ears, her heart thumping in her chest. There, lying sprawled on a bed of flattened grass and wild violets, was a man, face up, eyes half shut, skin still warm in the dawn chill. His chestnut hair curled back from his forehead, clean and dry, and his mustache looked like something out of an old magazine ad. He wore a suede jacket with frayed cuffs, bell-bottom jeans, and battered Adidas sneakers, the kind her father had worn in faded family photos. At first, Nancy thought it was a sick prank. Halloween was weeks away, but small towns bred all kinds of bored creativity. She knelt, reaching for the pulse at his throat, and recoiled at the unmistakable thrum, slow, fading, but real. The man was alive, or had been only moments before. Her hands shook as she dialed 911, stumbling through her name and location. He's not breathing, he's warm, I think he's just. She swallowed her panic as the dispatcher coached her through chest compressions, but there was nothing she could do. The man's body, though freshly fallen, offered no response, no gasp, no flutter of eyelids. Police arrived in minutes. The town was small enough that the officers recognized Nancy, and she stayed at the scene, arms wrapped tight around herself as the paramedics took over. Detective Marissa Keyes crouched beside the body, gloves snapping on as she worked through her routine. The man's skin was unblemished, the flesh pliant. She checked his pockets, expecting a wallet, maybe a phone, a clue to who he was or what had happened. Instead, she found a battered leather billfold containing a driver's license, Mark Jensen. The photo looked just like the man on the ground, same unruly hair, same wide-set, earnest eyes, but the issue date was ancient, October 1976. His cash was crisp but out of circulation, faded bills with 1970s serial numbers. In the other pocket, a tattered flyer for a Led Zeppelin concert, dated 1978, was folded around a book of matches from a bar that closed decades ago. Marissa exchanged a glance with Officer Holt, who'd just zipped the man's jacket up against the dew. You ever seen anything like this? Holt shook his head. He looks like my dad did when he left for college. But this guy's what, 30, 35? The coroner's van arrived as the early sunlight burned off the mist. The scene became a slow-motion ritual. Photographs, measurements, careful bagging of personal effects. The jogger's statement was taken, her words replayed for accuracy, her hand still trembling as she described the warmth of the body, the absence of blood or obvious injury. Nobody said the word fresh, but it hung in the air all the same, heavy with implication. Within an hour, half the police force crowded around the monitors at the station, staring at the driver's license, the ancient currency, the concert ticket. Mark Jensen. It was a name that tugged at old memories for some, one of those missing person stories that lingered in small towns, ghosting through the years. Records were pulled, a photo from a yellowed file surfaced. Mark Jensen, age 32, vanished July 1978. Last seen leaving the Starlight Tavern after midnight, never made it home. No trace. The cold case had become a local legend, but no one expected to see his face again, especially not exactly as it looked when he disappeared. The coroner called in from the morgue. He's still warm, she reported, her voice tight, like he just died. Rigors not set. There's no decomposition, none. This isn't. I don't know what this is. For a moment, no one responded. Detective Keyes looked at the timeline, at the matching ID, at the impossibilities sitting in their evidence locker. By noon the story had begun to circulate. The mayor wanted answers. Mark Jensen's old friends, those who hadn't left town, gathered at the station, faces stunned and pale, as they stared at the photos. "It's him," said one, voice trembling. "He hasn't aged a day. He's just like I remember." Keyes took notes, trying to remain rational. Anyone know what happened to him back then? Enemies? Problems? The answers were the same as 45 years ago. Nothing. He was a nice guy, a music lover, a face at the bar. But there he was, lying in the morgue, body still warm, decades out of time. The town's past had spilled into the present, as if the world had skipped a beat, and the questions were just beginning. Detective Marissa Keyes stared at the yellowed missing person poster, tacked up on the corkboard in the squad room, the edges curled like dried leaves. Next to it, under the harsh glare of the fluorescent lights, was a fresh high-res photo taken that morning at the scene. Mark Jensen, unchanged after 45 years, as if the world had simply paused and let him step out of the past. The resemblance was uncanny. No, it was absolute. Same sharp jawline, same stubborn cowlick, even the same faint scar above his eyebrow. Keyes had never seen a case like this, and neither had anyone else. The evidence table looked like the contents of a time capsule, the battered billfold with its disco-era license, the crisp, obsolete bills, the faded Led Zeppelin ticket, the matches from the Starlight Tavern, its address now a dentist's office. Keyes kept expecting someone to laugh and say it was an elaborate prank, but the body in the morgue, still warm, still flexible, blood bright under the coroner's gloved fingers, refused to play along. Forensics had worked fast. Jensen's fingerprints matched the old police files perfectly. Dental records, painstakingly scanned in from handwritten charts, confirmed it. There was no sign of trauma, no wounds, no evidence of a struggle. Tox screens would take longer, but the coroner muttered that if poison was involved, she'd never seen one that left flesh so fresh. The death certificate could only read, time of death, estimated within the last 4 hours. The contradiction burned through every page of the report. By mid-afternoon, word reached the Jensen family, what was left of them. Mark's younger sister, Linda, had been 17 when he vanished, now gray-haired and frail. She arrived at the station in a whirlwind of disbelief and old grief. She sat with Keyes in the interview room, her hands clamped tight around a handkerchief. The detective laid out the photos, the license, the man on the table, the 1978 flyer. Linda gasped, tears brimming. "That's Mark. That's really him." But he can't be. He'd be almost 80 now. She ran her thumb along the old family snapshot the department kept for the case file. He looks like the night he left. He even has that dumb suede jacket Mom always wanted to throw out. Her voice broke. I never stopped looking for him. Not really, Keyes asked gently. Did he say anything about trouble before he disappeared? Anyone following him? Any strange behavior? Linda shook her head. No, nothing. He worked at the hardware store, played guitar, hung out at the Starlight. He wasn't the kind of man who ran away. He loved this town. She touched the ticket. He was supposed to see Led Zeppelin. That's the night he vanished. When Keyes pressed her for details, Linda hesitated, eyes flicking to the door. There were rumors. Someone said they saw lights by the creek. Another said he argued with a stranger. Someone no one recognized outside the tavern. I always thought he got in a car, maybe with the wrong people, but he would have come home. After Linda left, Keyes dug through the old files. Statements from 1978 painted a blurry picture. Mark Jensen seen at the Starlight until midnight, left alone. A storm rolling in. One witness, now a retired shopkeeper, claimed Mark seemed spooked, glancing over his shoulder. Others remembered nothing unusual. Just another Saturday gone strange in hindsight. The strangest detail was yet to come. In the forensics lab, the medical examiner called Keyes in. She pointed to the body's exposed forearm. Look at this. Mark's digital watch, scratched and faded, read 2:41 a.m. The date still blinked. July 17th, 1978. The watch's battery, when tested, appeared brand new, as if it had never run down. Even the wallet's contents, receipts, an unused movie stub, were stamped with dates from that week in 1978. Keyes stared. It's like he just arrived. The examiner nodded. It's impossible. If this was staged, it's the most sophisticated trick I've ever seen. But there's more. She showed Keyes a scan of Mark's blood. Trace elements. Something's off. Isotopes you don't usually see. Slightly elevated tritium, the kind you get from nuclear testing, or maybe something else. It's weird, like he's been somewhere nobody's been. The evidence built a wall around any rational explanation. The media caught wind. News vans set up at the edge of the park, their anchors speculating wildly about cold case miracles, time travel, alien abduction. Townspeople gathered in small knots, swapping rumors old and new. The Jensen house was surrounded by neighbors bearing casseroles and questions. That evening, as dusk settled in, Keyes drove the route Mark had walked that last night, past the shuttered Starlight, down to the creek, through the park. Fireflies danced above the water, and for a moment, she could almost believe she'd see Mark himself come strolling out of the shadows, stepping from one era into another. The past and present had collided on this small patch of ground, and the ripples were only beginning to spread. Detective Keyes spent most of that night at her desk, sifting through every inch of the Mark Jensen case. Old witness statements, half-remembered rumors, and now the surreal facts piling up in the present. She made call after call, digging for anyone alive who remembered July 1978. The air in the squad room seemed charged, as if the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for sense to break through the strangeness. The Starlight Tavern, now a dentist's office, held little evidence, except a faded neon sign in the basement, and a few dusty bottles left over from the days when rock and roll pulsed through its walls. Keyes found the current owner, Mr. Leary, who'd inherited the building from his father. Leary remembered the night Mark disappeared. It was stormy, muggy as hell. Mark was sitting by the jukebox, nursing a beer, real quiet. My dad said he left around midnight, said something about the weird guy outside, but nobody could ever describe him, just that he didn't belong. There were old rumors in the files. Strange lights near the creek. Someone swearing they saw a car with its headlights off, parked in the trees. Another report described an odd fog that rolled in out of nowhere, thick enough to swallow up the bridge behind the park. At the time, the police chalked it up to frightened imagination, grief turning coincidence into mystery. Now, with Mark's body in the morgue warm unchanged, and full of 1978, Keyes began to wonder if something more had happened out there. She visited Mark's old neighborhood, a row of modest ranch houses now showing their age. One neighbor, Mrs. Boyd, was in her 80s, and had lived there since before Mark was born. She invited Keyes in, fussed over tea, and patted the detective's hand. "Oh, I remember him," she said, eyes clouding with memory. "Sweet boy, used to mow my lawn. That night, oh, that night was strange. I woke up to the sound of thunder, but the lightning was green. I looked out and thought I saw Mark standing in the road, talking to someone tall, wearing a hat, I think. But by the time I put my slippers on and got out to the porch, he was gone. I always wondered if I'd dreamed it." Mrs. Boyd handed Keyes a box of old Polaroids. Her way of helping, she said. Among shots of block parties and Christmas trees, Keyes found one from the summer of 1978. It was blurry, taken at dusk. She recognized Mark near the edge of the frame, his face half-turned, laughing at something out of view. To his left, in the background, was a vague shape, tall, lean, almost like a man, but with an outline that shimmered in the failing light. At the lab, the forensic pathologist called Keyes in for an update. She was poring over Mark's watch and wallet again, and her voice was almost apologetic. "We scanned the dust on his clothing. There are particulates we don't recognize. Some match volcanic soil, but not from anywhere around here. And we found a pollen type that hasn't been seen in this region since the late 70s, almost extinct now. There's something else too." She handed Keyes a small glass vial. Inside, suspended in clear solution, was a single silvery bead. "This was in the cuff of his jacket, so not any metal we know, and it's giving off faint radioactivity. The physics department at the college wants to see it." Theories multiplied. The papers ran wild. Time capsule corpse, cold case, from another dimension. The town buzzed with stories. Some whispered, some shouted. At the station, an elderly man named Pete Radcliffe showed up, clutching a rain-spotted notebook. He'd been working at the power station by the creek the night Mark vanished. "You're gonna think I'm nuts," he told Keyes, "but I saw it. Around 2:30 a.m. The lights flickered, hard, like something big was drawing current. I looked out and saw a flash, blue and white, so bright it hurt. Then the air just folded, like you could reach out and touch the sky. There was a noise too, not thunder, more like a deep hum, like the world was holding its breath." He drew a shaky breath. "I called it in, but they told me it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing, and now Mark's back. Only I guess he never left." Keyes thanked him, her mind spinning with the weight of impossibility. In her notebook, she wrote, "Where was Mark Jensen for 45 years? The facts said he died within the last few hours. Body still warm, clothes and cash stamped with a date no one could deny. But everything else said he'd stepped straight out of the past, untouched, unchanged, as if the world had paused and set him gently back down." That night, as she locked the evidence room, Keyes lingered over the Polaroid, the vial of unknown metal, the Led Zeppelin ticket. She wondered if Mark's return was a fluke, a miracle, or a warning, if other lost people might someday return, carrying the secrets of places no one on Earth had ever seen. The following day brought a deluge of reporters to the station, and a storm of questions Detective Keyes could barely keep at bay. TV vans jostled for curb space, and strangers with expensive cameras tried to interview anyone coming or going. The case of Mark Jensen had captured not just the town, but the whole region's imagination. But as the outside world speculated about time warps and secret labs, Keyes stayed focused on the real, stubborn evidence: the metal bead, the strange isotopes, and Mark's impossible return. She called in Dr. Alyssa Romero from the university's physics department to examine the mysterious bead. Romero arrived with a portable Geiger counter and an energy spectrometer, handling the vial with nervous curiosity. "It's not radioactive enough to be dangerous," she explained, "but it's definitely emitting low-level radiation I've only seen in synthetic isotopes, and the atomic structure is odd. There are patterns that don't occur naturally in terrestrial metals. It might be a manufactured alloy, but it's unlike anything on record." When Keyes pressed for a theory, Romero hesitated. "Honestly, if you handed this to a NASA scientist, they'd check the rover logs. It looks more like a sample from the moon than from Kansas soil." She turned the bead in the light. "Wherever Mark's been, it wasn't here." Meanwhile, the forensics team ran a final series of tests on Mark's blood and tissues. They confirmed again the isotopes in his blood: slightly elevated tritium, traces of an unknown compound, suggested recent exposure to environments unlike anything on Earth since the late 1970s. "It's as if he stepped out of a clean room kept frozen since Carter was president," the lab director joked, but no one laughed. The pollen too was a match for a nearly extinct variety of wildflower that had only grown in the region's creek beds in the 1970s, before a drought wiped it out. The evidence room now felt more like a museum of impossibility. Keyes lined up the objects: ticket stub, wallet, bead, Polaroid, Mark's untouched watch and cash, like clues in a scavenger hunt she was doomed never to solve. Every logical path ended in absurdity. Mark Jensen had been missing for 45 years, but he died only hours ago. That afternoon, Mark's sister Linda came to the morgue to see the body one last time before burial. She stood quietly at the slab, her hand trembling on his sleeve. "He looks so peaceful," she whispered, tears streaking her cheeks. "He looks just like the night he left. I almost expect him to open his eyes and laugh at all of us." Keyes stayed close, offering what comfort she could, but feeling powerless. There were no words for a mystery that shattered the rules of time and grief. Later, as Keyes drove Linda home, Linda spoke through the car window's reflection. "You know, the night he vanished, I had the strangest dream. I dreamed Mark was calling for me from far away, somewhere so cold the stars shook in the sky. When I woke up, I knew he wasn't coming home. But now," she trailed off, pressing her hand to her heart, "now I feel like he's finally free. Whatever happened to him, it's over." The town was restless that evening, clusters of neighbors lighting candles or leaving flowers at the edge of the park. Some whispered about government experiments or secret bunkers beneath the creek. Others muttered about portals, curses, or time slipping sideways. At dusk, a few local teens crept down to the bridge where Mark was last seen, daring each other to stand in the swirling mists, hoping for a glimpse of something out of place: a light, a shadow, a door cracked open. Keyes watched from her squad car, weary but vigilant. She fielded calls from distant police departments, old friends of Mark's family, and even a UFO enthusiast claiming to have seen strange green lightning the night before the body was found. Each story seemed to fray the edges of reality a little more, making the town's collective memory stranger, sadder, and somehow richer. As midnight approached, Keyes walked the path along the creek one last time, past the birch trees and the playground, listening to the night's sounds. The park was empty, quiet, except for the low chorus of frogs. In the darkness, the impossible case of Mark Jensen hung in the air like a riddle with no answer. Back at her desk, she flipped open her notebook, reviewing her careful columns of facts and wild theories. The bead was sealed in university storage, the autopsy report filed, and Mark's body finally scheduled for burial. Yet in the margins, Keyes found herself doodling a symbol, a jagged line, like a crack in the world, splitting one year from the next. She looked out at the stars and wondered, if time could break once, what else might slip through, and if Mark Jensen had returned, even for a single sunrise, who else lost, missing, or longed for, might someday find their way back. The day of Mark Jensen's funeral dawned gray and gentle, as if the sky itself was worn out from holding too many questions. The Jensen family plot, tucked beneath an old maple in the small-town cemetery, filled with neighbors and friends, faces both old and new, drawn by memory, curiosity, or the strange ache of something unfinished, finally coming home. Linda stood at the head of the grave, clutching a bouquet of wild flowers, her eyes never leaving her brother's casket as it was lowered into the earth. Detective Marissa Keyes stood a respectful distance away, her badge hidden, feeling more like a mourner than an investigator. She watched as the crowd huddled together, whispering the same stories she'd heard for days: how Mark had vanished in 1978, how his body was found warm and unchanged, how nobody could say what happened in between. The priest spoke the familiar words, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, but there was a hush between the lines, a sense that the earth itself was pausing to listen, waiting for an answer that would not come. After the ceremony, Linda found Keyes beneath the maple tree. Her voice was quiet, tired. "Thank you for treating him like a person, not a curiosity. I know you tried. I just wish." She trailed off, her shoulders shaking with the weight of decades. Keyes offered the only comfort she could. "We may never know where he went, Linda, but you have him back, and he's finally at rest. That matters." Linda nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. She pressed a photograph into Keyes's hand, the Polaroid from 1978, Mark laughing with his friends, just before he vanished. He always wanted to see the world. Maybe he finally did. The town slowly returned to its routines, but the undercurrent of speculation never faded. Every diner and bar hummed with new theories. Some insisted Mark had stumbled into a government experiment, others swore by time travel, and a handful believed he'd been taken and returned by something not of this earth. A few quietly wondered if there were doors between worlds, hidden in plain sight, and if Mark had found one by accident or design. Keyes filed her reports, each one colder and more clinical than the reality she'd witnessed. The bead remained in the university's lab, still giving off its faint alien hum. The watch and wallet were archived, sealed in a box marked evidence, unexplained. She caught herself staring at her notes late at night, tracing and retracing the facts, searching for a pattern that made sense. But every answer unraveled, leaving only more threads of wonder and unease. The media circus faded, leaving behind a few true crime podcasts and a local legend that would linger for generations. But some mysteries couldn't be commodified. Late one evening, as Keyes locked up the evidence room, she found a letter slipped under her office door. It was unsigned, written in a trembling hand. "I saw Mark that night too. I saw the light, and the man in the hat. He looked straight at me, and then he was gone. Don't stop looking. It's not over." Keyes felt a chill as she folded the note, filing it with her stack of unsolved clues. She thought about the bead, the wildflower pollen, the isotope traces, artifacts that hinted at a story much bigger than a single missing person. Something strange had brushed the town, something that left the door open just a crack. 1 week later, news of a nearly identical case surfaced in a neighboring state. Another missing person, vanished in the late 70s, found in a remote field, warm untouched by time, with artifacts from their own lost era. Keyes made the call herself, connecting with the out-of-town detectives. Their stories matched detail for detail, right down to the inexplicable trace metals and the impossible watches stuck on a summer night decades ago. As summer ripened, The town of Mark Jensen's birth and return settled into a new kind of watchfulness. Parents glanced twice at old bridges after dark, and local kids dared each other to walk the creek at midnight. The park where Mark was found became a place of pilgrimage for the hopeful and the haunted alike. Sometimes, on especially quiet evenings, Keys would walk there too, following the curve of the birch trees and listening to the wind. She would remember Mark's quiet smile in the old Polaroid and wonder what it meant to lose 45 years and come home for only a day. One night, as she walked beneath the stars, Keys paused at the edge of the creek, tracing a line in the dirt with her shoe. The breeze shifted, carrying the faintest hint of electricity, as if the world might crack open once more. She stood very still, waiting, listening for any sign that the impossible might happen again. And somewhere in the dark, beyond sight and reason, a door trembled, just for a heartbeat on its ancient hinges. Officer Adam Mercer had worked the night shift in Hollow Creek long enough to know when trouble was coming. There was a pressure in the air, an almost electric heaviness that made dogs bark and porch lights flicker. Tonight that feeling had chased him through a dozen routine calls, noise complaints, a runaway teen, a fender bender on Main, until the radio crackled at 2:13 a.m. with something different. Disturbance at the old waterworks. One male. Trespassing. Looks unstable. Neighbors say he's shouting for someone named Adam. Adam was closest. He spun the cruiser onto River Road, cutting through fog so thick it erased the world beyond the headlights. The waterworks had been boarded up for years, a hulking brick ruin on the edge of the reservoir. He parked under the shadow of the tanks, thumbed the safety off his flashlight, and moved toward the shouting. The voice was hoarse, but oddly familiar, raw with emotion, echoing off metal and stone. Adam, please just listen to me. He found the man crouched beside a broken fence, hands in the air, shivering in a ragged flannel and jeans. His hair was streaked with gray, beard wild, face cut by worry and exhaustion. For a heartbeat, Adam had the uncanny sense of looking in a cracked mirror. "Sir, I need you to stand up and keep your hands where I can see them," Adam called, working for calm authority. The man stood slowly, eyes locking onto Adam's with unsettling intensity. "Adam Mercer," he said, as if reciting a prayer. You're younger than I thought you'd be." Adam's hand tensed on the flashlight. "How do you know my name?" The man offered a strange, lopsided smile. "I know a lot about you, about us. Look, I know how this sounds, but you have to believe me. I'm you, 25 years from now." His voice broke on the last words, raw with desperation and something like hope. Adam frowned. Another delusional, he thought. He'd had plenty of experience with troubled souls and midnight prophets, men who claimed to be Jesus, Lincoln, or the ghost of Billy the Kid. Still, something about this man, his height, the crooked nose, broken years ago in a high school basketball game, the scar at the jaw, made Adam's skin crawl. "Turn around. Hands behind your head. We'll talk at the station," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. The man obeyed without resistance. Adam cuffed him, feeling the tremor in the older man's hands, the wince as the metal clicked shut. "You're making a mistake," the man said softly. "There's not much time left." They drove in silence. At the station, Adam booked the stranger. No wallet, no phone, only a faded photograph tucked into the pocket of his flannel. The photo showed Adam at 8 years old, holding a birthday cake, with Adam spelled in blue icing. His mother stood behind him, smiling, her arm around a younger version of herself. Adam felt the floor tilt. "Where did you get this?" The man's eyes filled with tears. "Mom's ring was lost that night, under the table. You never found it. Nobody did, but I know where it is." He leaned forward urgently. Check the vent behind the old stove. I put it there so Dad wouldn't pawn it for liquor. Adam's throat tightened. He remembered the argument, the panic, the days of searching for the ring. No one ever found it, and it became a family legend, one of those wounds that never quite healed. That's not possible, he said, too quietly. It is, the man whispered. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to stop you from making the worst mistake of your life. Adam finished booking him. John Doe, 40-something, no ID, prints on file as Adam Mercer. He sat the man in the holding cell, then retreated to the empty squad room, heart pounding. He ran his own fingers over the scar at his jaw. The resemblance was undeniable, down to the pattern of laugh lines and the dimple at his chin. He remembered how that dimple deepened when he was worried or tired. He pulled up his own file, comparing data. Height identical, eye color, green, flecked with gold, tutti-sake, woven duft with gold, tattoos. Adam had one on his left shoulder, a tiny eagle from his army days. The John Doe had it too, faded, stretched with age, but exactly the same. Down the hall, John Doe began to shout, Adam, there's not much time. She's going to call at exactly 4:03 a.m. If you answer, everything changes. Please, you have to believe me. Don't answer the phone. Don't go to her. Adam's skin crawled. He locked the cell door, turned out the lights, and sat at his desk, staring at the clock. The station seemed to close in around him, heavy with the smell of old coffee and thunder in the air. Was it a cruel trick, a breakdown, a cosmic joke, or had something truly extraordinary slipped through the night? As the minute hand crept toward 4, Adam watched his phone, dread blooming in his chest, the future suddenly unbearably close. Adam sat at his desk long after midnight, mind spinning, every detail of the strange man's arrest replaying in his head. The holding cell was down the hall, close enough that the suspect's voice could still echo faintly in the silence. Adam, please, don't answer the phone at 4:03. It matters. It matters more than you know. Adam tried to tune it out, but the desperation in those words stuck in his bones. He ran the man's fingerprints through the system. The result flashed up. Match. Adam Mercer. Adam blinked, checking again. It made no sense. He grabbed the booking sheet and compared the details. Height, weight, birthmarks, scars, all matched, even the most private details. The faded knife scar on the inner forearm, the tiny star-shaped freckle behind the left ear, a chipped incisor from a bicycle fall at 12. The computer didn't lie. But how could a man who looked 45, who called himself Adam, be sitting in his cell when Adam himself was only 28? A quiet unease crept over him. Adam glanced at the faded photograph again, tracing the smiling faces, his mother's gentle eyes, his own gap-toothed grin. She died 10 years ago, her ring still missing, an unsolved sorrow at the heart of his family. If it's a trick, Adam muttered, it's the cruelest one. He pushed back from his desk and strode to the evidence locker. The ring, he thought. He had to know. He grabbed a flashlight and drove across town, gravel pinging off the cruiser's undercarriage as he turned into his childhood driveway. The house was dark. His father long since moved to a condo in the city. The new owners let him in, sleepy but curious, after he explained it was police business. Adam found the old vent behind the stove, unpainted, slightly loose. He reached in, fingers brushing over grit, then something cool and round. Heart pounding, he drew it out, a gold ring, delicate and scuffed, with a tiny sapphire set in a filigree of leaves. His mother's wedding ring. He sat on the floor, staring at it, the world tilting. The story was true. The stranger knew things no one else could. It was impossible, but the proof gleamed in his hand. Back at the station, Adam entered the cell block, quietly. The older man, his future self, was waiting, sitting on the narrow cot, hands folded as if in prayer. His hair was damp at the temples, his eyes hollowed by exhaustion and hope. Adam pulled up a chair outside the bars, the ring heavy in his palm. "It was where you said. I found it. How did you know?" The man's face crumpled in relief. "I remember being you. I remember tonight. Finding it was one of the last good things, before everything went wrong." Adam pressed, voice trembling. "How did this happen? Are you really me?" The man nodded, struggling to find words. "Yes, I know it's hard to accept, but I've lived the life you're living now. Every choice, every mistake. I remember your first car, the dog you lost at 13, the thing you wish you'd said to Mom the night before she died." His voice dropped. "At 4:03 a.m., you'll get a call. It'll be Rachel Kettering. She'll sound scared. She'll say she needs help, that she's in trouble near the old train bridge." The man swallowed, voice raw. "If you go, you'll save her, but you'll make a choice that changes both your lives. You'll regret it. Every day." Adam's heart hammered at Rachel's name, a girl he'd dated in college, still friends, though they hadn't spoken in weeks. She had a wildness, a darkness. He'd always tried to help. Why would I regret saving her? The man hesitated, tears gathering. "Because you won't really save her. You'll give up everything, your badge, your future, your family, and in the end, you'll lose her anyway." He pressed a trembling hand to the bars. "Adam, please, let her call go to voicemail. Trust me, you'll both be better for it. I've spent 25 years trying to find a way back to this moment. It's the only chance either of us has to change." Adam recoiled. "That's not fair. I can't just ignore a friend in need. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do, but you must." The older man sagged, defeated, eyes shining with grief and hope. "All I ask is that you trust yourself. Trust me." The clock on the squad room wall crawled toward 4. Adam's phone buzzed once, a silent reminder of the world outside, of Rachel and every memory tied up in her laughter. He stood in the cell block's dim light, torn between everything he knew and everything he couldn't believe. The man in the cell, his own future self, watched him with aching familiarity, as if they both already knew what would happen next. As 4:03 approached, Adam faced a choice that felt bigger than time, bigger than fate itself. He clenched his mother's ring tight in his fist, staring at the phone, the seconds counting down to a future he now understood could still be rewritten. Adam Mercer stood frozen in the corridor, the silence of the squad room broken only by the relentless ticking of the wall clock. His mother's ring felt cool and heavy in his fist. The stranger, his supposed future self, sat quietly in the cell, but the weight of his words seemed to fill the air between them. "Trust yourself, trust me," it echoed in Adam's mind, threading between memory and instinct. He stared at his phone, at the glowing numbers, 4:02 a.m. The moment hung between breaths. Adam's mind reeled. Every cop instinct screamed to act, to answer, to help. That was his nature, had always been. But the ring in his hand, and the impossible truths of the last few hours, held him rooted in place. The phone buzzed. He almost answered out of reflex, but at the last second, Adam pulled his hand away and watched as the call rang out. Rachel's name lighting up the screen. The photo they'd taken at the county fair years ago smiling up at him. Her call went to voicemail. The silence after was thunderous. In the holding cell, the older Adam slumped in relief, shoulders sagging, as if a century's burden had fallen away. "Thank you," he whispered, voice cracking. "Thank you, Adam. You don't know what you just saved yourself from." But Adam's doubts crashed in. He unlocked the phone, listened to the voicemail. Rachel's voice trembled with panic. "Adam, I need you, please. I'm at the old train bridge. There's someone's following me. I don't know what to do." Then a hiss, a car in the background, and the call cut out. Adam's gut twisted. He pounded on the cell bars. How can you expect me to just ignore her? She sounds terrified. What if something really happens to her out there? The older man's eyes filled with regret. I know it hurts. I remember the feeling, the certainty that you could fix it all. But going to her, that night, it sets everything in motion. You'll save her from one danger, but it creates another. You'll try to hold on, to protect her, but the cost will be your life, your future. Trust me, Adam, she'll make it home. She'll find her way, and you'll both get to live your lives, scarred but free. Adam paced the squad room, indecision gnawing at him. What if it was a trick, some elaborate, psychological game? But every fact, every private memory, the ring, the matching fingerprints, pointed to an impossible truth. He checked police dispatch for any calls near the old train bridge. Nothing. He called Rachel's number, but it went straight to voicemail. The message haunted him. He looked up case files, news articles. Nothing. Just a blank, ordinary night in Hollow Creek. But a chill crept up his spine as he realized the future was not fixed, not if he chose differently. In the cell, the older Adam stared at the floor. When I answered her call, I became obsessed with saving her. I left the force. I lost touch with Dad, with everyone I cared about. Rachel and I tried to build something, but it never healed her wounds. In the end, she left anyway. All that was left was the echo of what could have been. Adam sat, suddenly exhausted. You remember all of this, because you lived it once. Yes, his future self said quietly, but I also remember this night, the ache of not knowing if you did the right thing, but not answering, letting her survive on her own. Gave her a chance. She got help from someone else. She made it through. And you got to keep living the life you fought for. A long silence settled between them. Adam let the words wash over him, feeling them settle into his bones, like a kind of sad wisdom. The desire to save, to fix, was part of him, but so was the understanding that some burdens could not be carried, no matter how strong or brave. Finally, Adam unlocked the cell door. The older man looked up, meeting his gaze with gratitude and sorrow. What happens to you now? Adam asked. His future self smiled faintly. That depends. Maybe I fade. Maybe I become a memory. Or maybe you'll never see me again, because now you've made a new path. Adam hesitated, then offered his hand through the bars. The older Adam gripped it firmly, a gesture of forgiveness, acceptance, and hope. Thank you, he said again, tears bright in his eyes. You've given us both another chance. The clock struck 4:10. The station seemed lighter, the air less heavy. Adam walked out to the parking lot, dawn just breaking on the horizon. He looked at the ring one last time, before tucking it into his pocket, a promise to himself, and to the man he might someday become, that some futures could be changed, if only he had the courage to let go. Adam Mercer stepped out into the night air, the squad room's fluorescent hum, giving way to the hush of pre-dawn Hollow Creek. A pale mist hugged the ground, and the sky was just beginning to blush at the edges, hinting at another ordinary day, that in reality felt anything but. He walked slowly to his cruiser, feeling the gravity of his choice settling deep into his chest. Every instinct told him to go check the train bridge, to make sure Rachel was safe. But another voice, older, worn but hopeful, echoed in his memory. Trust me, trust yourself. Adam sat behind the wheel, ring still warm in his palm. He dialed Rachel's number once more. It went to voicemail. He hung up before the beep. For a while he simply watched the empty street, half expecting something to happen. Lights flashing, an ambulance wailing, fate making itself visible, but nothing broke the peace. He turned the keys in the ignition and headed home, the world impossibly still. Back at the station, dawn had bled through the windows, and the day shift was starting to trickle in. Adam typed up his report, careful and bland. 1 trespass arrest. No incident. Suspect transferred. He felt a strange detachment as he filed it, knowing the real story would never fit any official form. In the holding cell, the older Adam sat quietly, eyes closed, hands resting easy in his lap. When Adam checked on him, their eyes met, and a silent understanding passed between them. You did it, the future self said, a smile flickering across his lined face. You broke the pattern. Adam wanted to ask 100 questions, but instead he said, "What happens to you now?" The man only shrugged. "I don't know. I think, maybe I fade, or maybe I get to live a new kind of memory." He pressed a hand to his heart. "Whatever comes, it won't be the same regret." Adam unlocked the cell. The man stood, a little shaky, and Adam realized just how much of himself he was seeing. Not just the likeness, but the weight of a life lived with pain and hope in equal measure. They walked together to the exit, silent in the blue half-light. At the door, the older Adam turned. "You'll never know for sure, Adam. That's what it means to change the story. But you gave us both a chance to heal." He paused, seeming lighter now, almost translucent as the day brightened. "And don't lose the ring. Give it to someone you love. It'll remind you. Sometimes letting go is the bravest thing." Adam nodded, too full for words. The man stepped out into the morning, vanishing down the quiet street, his figure already fading in the rising sun. Adam returned to his desk, not sure what to expect. A few hours later, Rachel called. She sounded tired, but alive, her voice a little shaky, but strong. "Sorry I missed you last night. Had a bit of a scare, but I'm okay. Some old friend from college picked me up near the bridge. Didn't mean to worry you." Adam listened, heart pounding with relief, and something like wonder. "Glad you're safe," he said, and meant it. Later Adam stopped by his childhood home. He pressed the ring into his father's hand, and together they sat quietly at the kitchen table, mourning and remembering. The old wounds of the past seemed to ache less in the sunlight. Weeks slipped by, each one more ordinary, and yet different, freer. Adam still sometimes dreamed of that night, of 2 versions of himself on opposite sides of a cell door, each hoping for another chance. He didn't know what had become of the future self. Maybe he had vanished, unneeded. Maybe he'd simply become part of Adam's own memory. A warning and a blessing rolled into one. But life went on. Rachel moved out of town for a new job. Adam kept the badge, but started spending more time with his father, and sometimes late at night, he'd find himself standing at the edge of the train bridge, watching the fog roll over the water, feeling the strange relief of not being haunted by what might have been. One morning, as he walked that same path home, he found a note tucked under his windshield wiper, written in his own handwriting, but older, shakier. "Thank you for choosing hope. Live the life I couldn't. I'll always be with you in the choices you make." Adam slipped the note into his wallet, next to the old birthday photo. Sometimes, the past needed rewriting, not with grand gestures, but with a moment's courage. Sometimes, the hardest rescue was letting go of the urge to save, and instead, learning how to trust the man you'd become. Adam spent the next several days, living as if under new light, the world subtly altered by the night he'd faced himself, and walked a different path. He caught himself studying his own reflection in the squad car window, searching for hints of the haunted older man, but found only the familiar weariness of a young cop who had finally laid down a burden he hadn't realized he was carrying. Rachel texted a few days after her call. She was on her way to her new city, sending him a photo of the sunrise from the highway. "Starting fresh," she wrote. Adam replied with a simple, honest wish. "Be safe. You've got this." He felt something in his chest unwind. No regret, just relief that their stories would go on, separate but whole. Word of the strange arrest at the station faded into the usual run-of-town rumors. The report Adam filed remained bare bones: trespassing, emotional distress, suspect transferred to county for further evaluation. There was no mention of time travel, no details about impossible rings or warnings about destiny. It was, on paper, just another sleepless night in Hollow Creek. No one seemed to notice that the John Doe never made it to county. The paperwork was quietly signed off, the chain of custody lost to bureaucracy and dawn. Still, Adam caught himself waking some nights with the sense of another presence just outside his line of sight, as if a wiser self still lingered in the edges of his life. Sometimes he'd hear the echo of a voice: "Live the life I couldn't." It wasn't a warning, but a benediction. Adam started to take it seriously. He called his father more often, sitting together over old photographs and stories they'd never shared before. He helped an old neighbor fix a leaky roof, even though the job took 3 weekends and left him with bruised fingers and sunburn. He volunteered at the animal shelter, adopting a mutt that followed him everywhere. Each small act felt like proof that the future was unwritten, that kindness, not regret, could shape a man's life. The ring stayed in his wallet, next to the note he'd found on his windshield, 2 impossible objects from a night he still couldn't quite believe. Sometimes, when the world was quiet, he'd turn the gold band over in his hand, tracing the tiny scratches, feeling the promise it held. One day, when the time was right, he knew he'd give it to someone he loved, not as an heirloom of grief, but as a symbol of hope. Rumors continued to swirl for a while. Some said the strange man had vanished from the station, others that he'd simply walked away, unseen. A few whispered that Adam had been seen talking to himself in the cell block, or that he'd received a letter from the future. He let the rumors live their own life, knowing that some stories didn't belong to the world, but to those who lived them. A month later, Adam drove out to the train bridge at sunset. The water below reflected the sky in colors that seemed almost otherworldly. He parked his cruiser and walked the path where in another life he'd have run headlong into disaster. Now he felt only peace, the hum of possibility filling the space where fear and regret had lived. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the note, aged, creased, but precious. He read it one more time. "Thank you for choosing hope. Live the life I couldn't. I'll always be with you in the choices you make." He folded it carefully, placing it back with the ring. Then, with a deep breath, he stepped onto the bridge and stood at the center, letting the world move quietly around him. For a while, Adam simply stood in the golden light, breathing in the air, feeling the current of the river and the steady thrum of his heart. He understood, now, that the future was never fixed, that at any moment, a single act of courage or compassion could change the whole story. That sometimes, the greatest rescue was not saving someone else, but learning to save yourself. The sky deepened, and the first stars flickered on. Adam turned for home, his steps steady, his mind unburdened by what-ifs. He knew there would be hard nights again, calls he couldn't answer, friends he couldn't save, but he also knew that he would face them differently, no longer chained to the shadow of regret, but moving forward with hope. And as he walked away from the bridge, Adam felt, just for a heartbeat, a hand on his shoulder, warm and steady. Whether it was memory, fate, or something stranger, he didn't know. He only knew that he was finally, truly free. The station's night shift always felt a little too long in late October, when the wind clawed at the old windows and every tick of the clock stretched. Officer Jane Price was used to slow, haunted hours in the Hollow Creek lockup, where the biggest excitement most nights was someone staggering in drunk or a fistfight down at Bill's bar. But tonight, a tension hummed through the air, an uneasy feeling that settled in her bones as she finished her paperwork and glanced up at the surveillance monitor above her desk. The jail wing was quiet, 4 cells lining the far corridor, only one held a prisoner. Bobby Ellis, a harmless shoplifter, already snoring in the back bunk, curled under a scratchy county blanket. The other 3 cells gaped open, shadows stretching long over the chipped linoleum. Jane's partner, Terry, paced the far hall, the scuff of his boots the only sound. The clock on the wall clicked to 1:17 a.m. Jane checked her log, signed off on a transfer sheet, and was about to pour herself another cup of lukewarm coffee when the noise came. A sudden violent bang, so loud it rattled her mug and sent the pen rolling off the desk. The unmistakable sound of a heavy jail cell door slamming shut. The kind of noise that meant a fight, a break, or worse. Terry's radio crackled. "Jane, did you hear that?" His voice was tight, the bravado stripped away. "Yeah, I'm coming." Jane stood so fast her chair nearly toppled. She grabbed her flashlight and keys, heart pounding, every sense sharpened. She rushed down the corridor, boots echoing as she passed the occupied cell. Bobby barely stirred, oblivious in his dreams. The sound had come from the end of the hall, one of the empty cells. The second from the end was now locked tight. The solid steel door was flush to the jamb, the old brass keyhole gleaming in the half-light. Jane swept her flashlight over the bars, expecting to find a trick, a prank, maybe a would-be escapee hiding in the shadows. But the cell was empty. She looked up, confusion prickling her scalp. The bunk was untouched, the floor bare but for a scuffed shoe print, one of their own, she guessed, from when the cell was last cleaned. No movement, no hidden body, nothing but stale air and dust motes. She rattled the door. It didn't budge. Terry came up beside her, face pale. "You saw it too, right? It wasn't open a minute ago. I walked right by. Door was wide open." Jane nodded. "Someone's messing with us." Or the lock slipped. But her words felt thin, unconvincing. She tried the keys. None would fit, not the way they were supposed to. The lock, old but reliable, hadn't jammed once in years. "Check the cameras," Terry said, voice shaky. Back in the office, Jane rewound the jail wing's video feed. The footage played out in stark black and white, the cell doors all open, the clock rolling from 1:15 to 1:16, the hall empty, except for the drift of dust. At 1:17 exactly, the door to cell 2 began to move, slow at first, then with no one near it. It swung violently shut, as if slammed by an invisible hand. The metal rang out on the tape, clear and sharp. No figure, no shadow, no trick of the light. "Could be a draft," Terry offered, but neither of them believed it. There were no windows in the jail wing, and no air vent strong enough to move a steel door. Jane tried to shake off the chill, creeping up her arms. "Call maintenance in the morning. Maybe the hinges are off." But even as she said it, an old story flickered in the back of her mind, something an older officer had told her on her first night shift years ago, about strange sounds in the jail, unexplained cold spots, voices in the night when the cells were empty. She'd always brushed it off as small-town superstition, just something the old-timers whispered to scare the rookies. Now as she locked the wing and returned to her desk, she glanced once more at the video feed. The closed cell door stood out like a bad omen, perfectly sealed, shadows gathering in the corners. Terry left early, muttering about paperwork at home. Alone, Jane kept busy, but the station seemed different now, charged, unsettled, as if the building itself was listening. When she went to check on Bobby Ellis, he woke with a start, wide-eyed and sweaty. "Was someone in here?" he whispered, voice trembling. Heard a door, and someone crying. "No one's here but you, Bobby. Get some sleep." Jane lied, though she wasn't sure who she was reassuring. When dawn finally broke, pale and slow, the cell remained locked. No sign of tampering, no answer to who or what had slammed it shut. Jane stood in the empty corridor, staring at the steel bars, the echo of that midnight bang still thrumming in her chest. She made a quiet promise to herself. She'd find out what haunted that cell, no matter what it cost. Jane spent the next morning, in a strange daze, the memory of that cell door, slamming echoing in her mind, with the stubborn persistence of a bad dream. The routine hum of paperwork and small-town chatter felt thinner somehow, the police station's walls more hollow than before. Every time she glanced at the monitor, her eyes went straight to that locked cell, number 2, still shut tight, still empty. The sense of unease clung to her, heavier with every passing hour. By noon, maintenance arrived. Mike, the grizzled janitor, carried his ring of keys and a battered toolbox. "Heard you had a door slam on its own," he muttered, half teasing, half wary as he knelt beside the cell. He examined the hinges, the lock, even the heavy metal door itself. After a full hour of checking and oiling, he shook his head. Nothing wrong with it. Lock's solid, springs are new, door weighs 100 pounds, takes a hell of a push to close it that hard. He glanced at Jane, eyes flickering with something like sympathy. "You ever hear about old Sheriff Minton?" Said this cell gave him the creeps too. Swore he'd hear it bang shut when the place was empty. Jane tried to laugh it off, but the effort died in her throat. She called up the security footage again, for Mike to see. Together they watched the grainy black and white recording, 1:17 a.m. The cell door drifting slowly, then without a soul in sight, slamming shut with a violence that made both of them flinch. Mike watched in silence, scratching his chin. "Never seen anything like it," he admitted. "Maybe a draft, but with these walls." He shrugged, but his hands were trembling slightly as he packed up his tools. After lunch, Jane checked the maintenance logs. The cell had been inspected just a week before. No issues. She even called the county's locksmith, who confirmed that lock's one of the best. Impossible to trip it without turning the key. Back at her desk, Jane replayed the night in her mind. Every detail seemed suddenly strange. Bobby Ellis waking in terror, whispering about someone crying. Terry's pale face, the way he left early, as if hoping to escape the charge in the air. The more she tried to rationalize it, the less it made sense. A handful of officers gathered for coffee, their chatter low and uneasy. "You hear about Cell 2, someone whispered. "Spooked Jane and Terry pretty good." Another officer, Lenny, a veteran close to retirement, leaned in. "Tich Cell's always been off. My old partner used to say he heard voices in there. Caught a cold spot once that nearly froze his hand." The others laughed, but the laughter had an edge, as if none of them quite wanted to be alone in the jail wing that night. Jane decided to dig deeper. She checked the station archives, dust motes swirling in the old records room. The logbooks stretched back decades, yellowed pages crammed with neat script. In the logs for 1987, she found a note. Inmate reported seeing a man in cell 2. We found nothing. Door was locked. Night staff heard crying. Investigated. Cell empty. In 1995, cell 2 locked itself. No malfunction found. Maintenance baffled. The stories weren't frequent, but they stretched back years. Always the same cell, always at night. She tracked down Terry, who'd gone home after his shift. "You sleep all right?" she asked on the phone. "Not really," he admitted. "Kept hearing that bang. Swear I heard footsteps in my apartment around 3. It's probably just nerves, right?" Jane almost agreed, but the words caught in her throat. That evening, as dusk settled, she stopped by Bobby Ellis's cell. He looked rough, shadows under his eyes, hands trembling as he clutched the thin blanket. "You sure no one was here?" he whispered. Jane shook her head. "No one but you and me, Bobby." "What did you hear?" He licked his lips. "It was after the bang. Thought I heard crying. Not a man, not a woman, almost like a kid. Then it got cold, real cold. I thought maybe I was dreaming, but it felt real." Jane thanked him, unease prickling up her spine. She left the jail wing, pausing outside cell 2, staring through the bars into the empty space. The air felt cooler, the shadows deeper. She pressed her hand to the metal, expecting only cold, but a shiver ran up her arm, a sensation that was almost like being watched. That night, Jane sat at her desk with the door to the jail wing open, her mind swirling with questions. The cell door had slammed shut by itself, in full view of the camera. Maintenance and locks were sound, and now, the whole station seemed to remember a history of strange noises, cold spots, and old unsolved cries in the night. Jane made up her mind. She'd stay late tomorrow. If something haunted that cell, she wanted to see it for herself, and maybe, just maybe, put a restless secret to rest. The next evening, Jane returned to the station with a thermos of black coffee, and her nerves strung tight as piano wire. She let the day shift wind down without comment, fielding the usual ribbing. "Watch out for ghosts tonight, Price," with a thin smile. When the last of her colleagues filed out, and the building quieted, Jane turned the jail wing lights to low, and settled at her desk, notebook open, eyes fixed on the monitor that displayed the empty cells. Cell 2, as always, drew her attention like a magnet. The night crept forward in slow, deliberate minutes. At midnight, Jane walked the corridor, checking each cell. Bobby Ellis was gone, transferred that afternoon, leaving the jail empty, but for its long, echoing silences. Jane paused at cell 2, the metal bars cold beneath her fingers. She stepped inside, half expecting the temperature to drop, for something to brush past her in the gloom. But the cell was just a cell, old steel, chipped paint, the faint scent of cleaning fluid. She let the door stand open behind her, listening to her own heartbeat, willing herself to feel foolish. She stayed in the cell for several minutes, taking notes. No cold spots, no voices, nothing but a faint draft, and the ticking of the hallway clock. Eventually she left, pulling the door half closed, and returned to the office, feeling equal parts relief and frustration. Maybe it really was just a fluke, metal settling, a trick of airflow. By 1 a.m., the station's quiet grew oppressive. Jane sipped her coffee, reviewed the security feed, and flipped through old logs, each odd report piling up, hinting at something just out of reach. The wind rattled the windows. She turned up the volume on the cell microphone, hoping for anything. At 1:14 a.m., the temperature in the office dropped abruptly. Jane rubbed her arms and stared at the monitor. The cells were empty, but something seemed different. The shadows in cell 2 pressed deeper, the camera's image almost blurry. The hallway lights flickered. A soft sound drifted through the speaker, low, rhythmic, almost like sobbing. Jane froze, her pulse hammering. The sound built, a whimper turning into a muffled cry. She turned up the volume, holding her breath, but the noise faded, replaced by silence so heavy, it seemed to press against her eardrums. Jane pushed back from her desk, flashlight in hand, and moved down the corridor. She stopped outside cell 2. The air was frigid, her breath visible in the beam of her light. "Who's there?" she called, voice steadier than she felt. The silence answered, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. She stepped inside the cell again, swinging the door wide. For a moment she stood in the center, scanning every corner. Then as she turned to leave, she saw it, a fleeting shadow in the hallway. A child's outline no taller than her hip. It vanished as soon as she blinked. Her mouth went dry. "If you need help, I'm listening," Jane whispered. She felt foolish, but it was all she could think to say. A faint, icy wind brushed her cheek, and then nothing. The air warmed. The room felt ordinary once more. She stepped out, closing the door gently behind her. Back in the office, Jane wrote down everything. The chill, the sobbing, the shadow. She replayed the security footage, heart pounding. At 1:17, the camera caught a strange distortion, a smudge of movement in the empty corridor. The cell door shivered, then stopped. She called Terry, waking him with a start. I heard something tonight, not just the door. I heard crying, and I saw, well, something. Terry was silent for a long time, then confessed, I've seen things in that cell too. Not every night, but enough. I never wanted to talk about it. Jane didn't sleep when her shift ended. Instead, she drove out to the county records office. As soon as it opened, the need for answers burning in her gut, she combed through incident reports, death records, old newspaper clippings. In 1974, a child named David McCabe, age 11, had been held overnight in cell 2 after running away from foster care. He died in custody, an asthma attack, the report said. His parents had sued the department. The town had paid quietly, and the story faded. Jane sat in her car, staring at the black and white photo of David. He had big eyes, a nervous smile. In her mind, she heard the sobbing echo, felt the brush of cold air. She returned to the station that afternoon, and stood outside cell 2, David's photo in hand. I'm sorry, she whispered. No one should have been alone here. Not you. Not anyone. The cell was still and silent, but Jane felt the weight inside her chest lighten, just a little, as if the building itself had let out a slow breath. She didn't know if she believed in ghosts, but she knew that sometimes the past was too heavy to be silent forever. Jane stayed late again, unable to leave the station's strange quiet. The building felt different now, not just haunted, but heavy with memory, as if the walls were waiting for something. She sat at her desk reading the McCabe file over and over, piecing together a story that was never meant to be told. The faded police report was full of gaps. Child placed in cell 2 for safekeeping. After being found on Main Street, inmate suffered an asthma attack. At 1:11 a.m., CPR unsuccessful. Complaint filed by Mrs. McCabe. Officer on duty, Sheriff Minton. Jane stared at Minton's name. He'd been the town's legend. Iron Minton, with a reputation for toughness, not tenderness. She remembered his retirement party, the way he'd lingered at the edge of the crowd, not meeting anyone's eyes. She wondered if this was the secret he'd carried. The station's night settled around her. She turned the logbook pages with slow, deliberate care. There it was again. Reports every few years. Cell 2 slamming. Voices in the night. Cold spots. Most notes were brief, almost embarrassed, as if the writers didn't want to admit they'd felt anything unusual. She saw Minton's old handwriting. Checked on cell. Nothing found. Must have been the pipes. And imagined him convincing himself it was nothing. Unable to sleep, Jane called Lenny, the retired officer. He sounded surprised, then wary when she explained what she'd found. I never liked that cell, he admitted. Some nights it felt like you could hear a kid crying, even when it was empty. Once or twice, the door would shut on its own. Minton never talked about David McCabe after that night. Said it was best to let old ghosts rest, but I always thought he wished he'd done more. Jane pressed for details, and Lenny sighed. Back then, nobody wanted to admit a mistake. That cell should have never been used for a child. We all felt it. The town tried to forget, but I don't think that kind of thing just fades. Jane hung up and walked the jail wing once more. The station silent, except for the hum of the soda machine. At cell 2, she paused, David's photo in her hand. I know what happened to you, David. I'm sorry it was here. Sorry you were alone. She set the photo on the metal bunk, her voice low and careful. You deserved better. We all do. A cold draft whispered through the bars, stirring the photo. For a heartbeat, Jane thought she heard the faintest voice, soft, childlike, almost a sigh. She waited, but it faded into the familiar silence. The cell's temperature eased. The air felt less oppressive. Back in the office, Jane started writing. She didn't sugarcoat the story, or shy from the truth. She wrote a report detailing David's death, the strange occurrences in Cell 2, and her own experiences. She recommended that the department formally mark the cell. No more detaining anyone there. No more pretending nothing had happened. She wrote that sometimes, for the living to keep watch, the dead had to be acknowledged. It was the kind of report no one would want to file, but Jane knew it mattered. Before she left, she composed a short letter to Mrs. McCabe, who still lived 2 counties over. Her address tucked in the file. She didn't mention ghosts or cold spots, only that she was sorry, and that David's memory was being honored at the station. She added her own phone number at the end. The next morning, as the sun filtered through the front windows, Jane met with the chief. She laid the report on his desk and told the whole story, not skipping a single detail. He read in silence, eyes growing heavy. If there's any justice in the world, maybe this is how it starts, he finally said. That afternoon, the cell was formally sealed. Jane and a handful of officers stood in the hall, marking the moment in silence. They placed a small plaque beside the door, in memory of David McCabe, 1963-1974. May you rest in peace. The air felt lighter in the station, as if some invisible tension had eased. As Jane left for the night, she paused in the corridor. The sun slanted through the windows, painting gold across the old linoleum. Cell 2 stood quiet and still, the plaque shining softly in the fading light. Jane let herself hope, for the first time since the door slammed, that the station and the child who haunted it had finally been heard. The weeks that followed passed quietly, as if the whole station were holding its breath. Officers still swapped ghost stories over coffee, but the old tension in the jail wing had faded, replaced by a gentler, almost reverent silence. Cell 2 remained sealed, the plaque beside the door always shining with a fresh polish. Even the most skeptical officers, the ones who'd once laughed at haunted cell talk, now spoke of David McCabe with respect, lowering their voices when they passed his memory in the hall. Jane Price felt the change most keenly. For the first time in her career, she no longer dreaded late shifts alone in the station. She still walked the jail wing some nights, pausing outside Cell 2 to rest her palm on the plaque and whisper a greeting. She never heard the cell door slam again, nor felt the icy wind or the aching sadness that had clung to the air for so long. Instead, there was a gentle stillness, as if the building itself had released a long-held breath. The letter to Mrs. McCabe was answered a week after she sent it. The handwriting was shaky, careful. Dear Officer Price, I thought the world had forgotten my son. Thank you for writing. I still remember his laugh, the way he'd sit on the porch and hum old radio songs. For years I felt I was the only one who remembered. Your letter means more than I can say. I pray he's at peace, and now, maybe I will be too. Thank you for honoring him. Sincerely, Lillian McCabe. Jane read it 3 times before tucking it safely in her notebook. She felt a strange kinship with Mrs. McCabe, a sense that the weight of the past had shifted, if only a little. The station chief followed Jane's recommendations. Cell 2 was retired for good. No more prisoners, not even for storage. They left the bunk and the photo Jane had placed, dusted weekly with care. The department quietly hosted a remembrance. No press, just a handful of staff, Lenny, and a couple of retirees, and Mrs. McCabe herself, frail but proud, traveling with her niece. They stood in the quiet corridor, reading David's name, bowing their heads together in a silence that was no longer haunted, but healing. Afterward, Mrs. McCabe squeezed Jane's hand. "I always wished someone had listened back then," she said softly. "Maybe now David can rest, and maybe the others who need remembering will find someone like you." Life moved on. The jail's routine returned, booking drunks, writing reports, walking the halls, but officers swore the air stayed warmer in the wing, and no one reported unexplained chills or voices in the night. Some of the younger staff, braver now, even joked about the ghost who finally got his piece. They left small tokens at the plaque, flowers, a marble, a baseball card, gestures of respect that became an unspoken tradition. Jane sometimes caught herself listening for the old familiar bang of a slamming cell door, but it never came. Instead, she'd hear a soft rustle, as if a child were turning over on the bunk, settling into a well-earned sleep. She wondered if it was her imagination, or a sign that David was finally where he belonged. One autumn evening, near the anniversary of that long-ago night, Jane found herself alone at the station. She wandered the jail wing in the quiet dusk, pausing by cell 2. The corridor was painted with golden light. She laid her hand on the plaque and said, "Rest easy, David, we remember." As she turned to go, she thought she heard the faintest echo of a child's laugh, gentle content. She smiled, carrying the sound with her, as she stepped into the evening air. In time, the story of Cell 2 became part of Hollow Creek's history, a quiet lesson in compassion and memory. New recruits heard it during orientation, not as a ghost tale, but as a reminder that every place, no matter how ordinary, carries its own truths and its own debts to the past. The jail was still just a small town lockup, but in one corner, it became a place of solace, a place where even lost voices could finally be heard and honored. Jane Price moved on in her career, but she never forgot Cell 2, or the lesson she learned there. Some doors can only close in peace when someone finally listens, and sometimes the truest duty of the living is to keep watch for the voices that the world tries to forget.